Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Okay, clicker working, great. I'm Sheryl Cababa. My pronouns are she and her, and I am the Chief Strategy Officer at Substantial. And as Hilla mentioned, I also wrote a book called Closing the Loop Systems Thinking for Designers, which I will be speaking about a little bit today. I know I'm the first talk in the morning, so I was thinking maybe we could just do a little quick breathing exercise, just to kind of like get ourselves grounded. I do this breathing exercise called 4-7-8. So you breathe in for 4, you hold it for 7, and then you breathe out for 8. And we'll do that just a couple of times if you're with me on this. So let's get started. So breathe in, 1, 2, 3, 4, hold, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and now exhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Breathe in, 1, 2, 3, 4, hold, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and breathe out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, thank you for indulging me in that. I also didn't want to be like breathing super loudly into the microphone. So I'm going to be talking about designing for a more equitable world with systems thinking, which is what my book is about. So Substantial is an independent design research and strategy firm, and I run an equity-centered design practice. And I'll talk about that and sort of like the intersection with systems thinking as well. When I'm not at work, I also teach at the University of Washington's Human-Centered Design and Engineering School. So this is my book. I have a discount code. I'll show this slide again later, by the way. But for 20% off, you can punch in CLL-CPH. And I'm also selling a very small handful of copies today, as Helen mentioned. So if you want a book signed, I think I have 6 copies exactly. So hopefully you can pick one up. Okay, so how many of you are familiar with the design thinking process as it's expressed here? Yeah, quite a few of you. Usually it's like a series of hexagons. It was popularized by the D School, Stanford D School. And I'm someone whose career has been foundationally impacted by design thinking as a method, as a process, and as a philosophy. And just knowing that many of you are also familiar with it, and you probably use it in your day-to-day work, it's, just to kind of like recap, there's 5 steps starting with empathize. Empathize is where you conduct design research, you understand people's context. Define is where you take those insights and you use them to kind of develop things like how might we prompts. Ideate is where you kind of ideate on potential solutions. Prototype and test is where you then prototype and test low fidelity and high fidelity solutions. And the reason that I've depicted it as a circle is it's meant to be iterative. And yeah, this is something that we typically use and is the foundation of user-centered design. Now, I think the way that it often manifests the design thinking process is that we as the design practitioners are focused on users. So users of the products and services, et cetera, solutions that we're designing. I think this is somewhat problematic, kind of given the issues that we have at scale, the way things the way things impact different people in different communities. And part of that is because we're designing for the direct benefit of use. So kind of think about how you test products and how you think about, if many of you are involved in designing digital products, you're kind of thinking about how people use a product in the moment. And I think there's a few distinct issues with continuing to design with a narrow focus on users. The first being the user-centered design process does not acknowledge nor address potential harm. An example that I use a lot for this is infinite scroll. I really love this GIF because it's like literally what you see people doing at bus stops all the time. And Asa Raskin, who's often credited, or I guess we could say blamed for the concept of infinite scroll, has said, "One of my lessons from infinite scroll that optimizing something for ease of use does not mean best for the user or humanity." So designing for like what people want in the moment does not necessarily lead to good outcomes. And I think we're better understanding that today than we did even 10 or 15 years ago. The second issue is that a user-centered approach limits the potential impact of design. I really like this image that Erica Hall, who wrote Just Enough Research, posted on Twitter a few years ago, basically kind of like depicting, using the anglerfish as a metaphor with UX as kind of like that shiny beacon where we're kind of designing really nice experiences to attract people into business models that will devour them, are probably not really good for them. I think we saw in a couple of the talks yesterday, just like some examples of that, for example, in e-commerce, when I was talking about kind commerce, I think the key issue is you can do a lot of changes to the UX, but if the business model is strictly profit-driven, it's almost like, how much impact could you actually have unless the business model itself changes? And so I think when we're focused on users and kind of like the end user experience, there's only so much impact we can have if it's aligning with a business model that we have sort of like this cognitive dissonance with. Lastly, a user-centered process does not inherently take into account systemic forces. In 2016, the designer Chris Alawa wrote a series of articles on Medium that I really like and I point people to often, called Stop Designing for Africa. And he talks about, I don't know if y'all remember the XO laptop. It was like in the mid-2000s. The movement was called One Laptop Per Child. And they were trying to give these laptops away in basically developing economies. And the initiative failed for a myriad of reasons. And one key reason is that the designers and distributors did not understand the context of ownership. Chris Alawa said, "The XO laptop was rejected by adults in African low-income economies because it focused on empowering one child as opposed to providing value to a family or entire community." And so there was really like this missing context. There was this missing understanding of the systemic forces at play. And I think this happens over and over again. I used to do a lot of work in global health, and one example I think of often is I think there was like a soccer ball that was designed by like a startup that was meant to generate energy when kids kicked it around, but you'd have to like kick the ball around for like 3 hours to even power a light bulb for like 15 minutes or something. And it's just kind of like, yeah, what are we doing here? Like that's not necessarily like the way to kind of solve these problems that are systemic and are difficult to kind of think of like a silver bullet to, basically solve for them. So how can we be more intentional about things like incentives and outcomes? I think we have, at the bottom here, like the current reality is what we have is the current status quo. And then above that is what we want to happen, our vision, our mission, and values. And in between that space is creative tension. And, this is where we can drive change. So aligning with stakeholders on what is happening in the system, what needs to be addressed, and also being explicit about both ends, the current reality, the status quo, and then what we want to happen. You can drive change in meaningful ways. So the antidote to kind of the limitations that I was talking about, I believe, are systems thinking. And I really encourage designers to adopt a systems thinking mindset. It forces us to consider beyond the direct benefits of use. So this means going beyond individual users, their context, and their use of products and services. And as we launch into kind of thinking about systems thinking, we first have to define what a system is. And I'm curious about if any of you might have like a definition of a system. All right, it's early. It's all good. It's all good. So I will give a definition from Donella Meadows, who wrote Thinking in Systems, which is a classic in systems thinking. She says, a system is more than the sum of its parts. It may exhibit adaptive, dynamic, goal-seeking, self-preserving, and sometimes evolutionary behavior. It's a way of looking at the world. And so the way she thinks about it is that it's an interconnected set of elements coherently organized in a way that achieves something. What that means is, like, you can kind of think of it as a system has a mind of its own. There are various stakeholders within the system with their incentives and various layers of power, and the way they behave kind of contributes to how the system as a whole works. And a way to think about this in the context of your work as a designer is to expand your thinking in 3 ways. One is thinking about interconnectedness, how things are connected in ways that you may not be necessarily obvious on the surface level, but that affect each other and affect the ways of problem solving. The second is causality. So oftentimes you hear people talking about consequences, like both intended consequences and unintended consequences. And this is how you think about causality, is how one thing leads to another. And then lastly, there's wholeness. So the system is likely more expansive than you think it is in terms of where you fit in terms of your problem solving. So for example, I'll talk about this a little bit later as well. I do a lot of work in education in the US, and the education system, not just in the US, but in various places, is really complex, bureaucratic, and there's a lot of decision makers and various incentives. But oftentimes when I work with ed tech companies, they don't really acknowledge that. They kind of think about, how are people using my product in a classroom for the various technologies that we're developing?
Thank you for that.
Great. This is your speaker gift.
Oh, thank you.